Welcome to Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release, a podcast dedicated to licensed wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians who support them. I'm your host, Gail Buell. Okay, everybody, this is my first time having a co-host, and I am so excited because this is a person that I've worked with for a very long time, and I have been itching to try to figure out how to get her on the podcast, and we did. I want to introduce Dr. Julia Ponder, and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about her extensive background. But of course, the most important part is that we worked together for a long time. I'm kidding. Anyway, Julie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'd love to. And do you have to stress the length and the extent of all this? It kind of makes us feel old, doesn't it?
We are old.
Oh,
but you know, that can be a good thing. I'm okay with it.
Okay.
I've been in this work a long time, and I'm pretty darn proud of it. And I'm proud of where the sector is going in professionalism, and you're going to hear about that in the podcast episode today. But I am actually pretty proud of it.
As you and we should be. As you and we should be. So yeah, I am I'm retired now, but my work was as a clinical wildlife veterinarian, working specifically with raptors and birds coming through wildlife rehabilitation at the University of Minnesota at the Raptor Center. And I also have a background in public health. So that has been a fabulous connection for me, or was a fabulous connection to bring exactly what we're going to be talking about today, the health of wild animals and the information that we can get out of that, integrate it to understand how that works with our health, with the environment health, this whole One Health concept.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I wanted to bring your expertise and a lot of your thoughts around all of what you just said to this conversation we're going to have today. And we're going to be going back and forth with questions. And it's a great conversation. I can't wait for you all to hear it. But we have folks from Wild Alert joining us today. And Wild Alert, well, actually, do you want to explain what Wild Alert is, Julie?
Sure. Wild Alert is an innovative program or project that has really taken on in a space that is dearly needed. It takes data or information from animals seen in wildlife rehabilitation, and it integrates it just so that they can look at it on a large level and look for changes in trends or patterns. So were there suddenly more rabbits with sneezing and neurological signs seen in wildlife rehabilitators or in wildlife rehabilitation in a certain area? And that would then trigger an alert to go look and see what's going on there. Sometimes sometimes it can be a false alert, but sometimes it can be the emergence of a disease like West Nile virus or highly pathogenic avian influenza. Sometimes it can be a toxicity situation, but by bringing information or data into information from wildlife rehabilitation centers around a geographic area, you can find these changes that tell us something new, something different is happening. We need to pay attention because this affects not only the wildlife populations themselves, but it affects us. It tells us if there might be something that is going to affect domestic livestock, domestic animals, humans, the environment. It really is an alert system focused on the wild animals and the wild populations, but that can benefit all of us.
I'm glad you said it. I never would have said it quite so eloquently. It was wonderful, but we were very excited about this. Both of us heard the folks from Wild Alert speak at an NWRA conference a few years ago, and both of us looked at each other and said, "Oh my goodness, this is a game changer." And for me, of course, I was thinking podcast, and it's taken a little while, but we've got them on, and I think that you're going to really enjoy it. Today, we have a huge lineup, and I want to get everybody introduced. And so I would like to kind of go around and have people give their short version of their origin story. How did you get to where you are today? So, boy, Rachel, let's start with you.
Yes, thank you, Gail. It's lovely to be here again. I'm really happy to talk to you. So I got started about 20, little over 20 years ago as just a little intern at Bird Rescue Center of Santa Rosa. And then I was an intern at Lindsay Wildlife Museum at Walnut Creek. And I was studying environmental science at a local college in the Bay Area. And I just fell in love with wildlife rehab. And when I was looking at like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I'm like, why would I change what I'm doing now? Because I just absolutely love it.
Mhm.
So, just continued being a intern, volunteer, moved into like volunteer management, um, and worked at Lindsay Wildlife Museum for about 12 or 13 years. And then in the process of that, I met my husband, Devin, who is the other co-founder of the Wild Neighbors Database Project. And we started developing WORMS, which is the Wildlife Rehabilitation Medical Database, and realized that there was a huge need for a standardized system that any wildlife rehabilitator could use from, the lady in her horse barn to universities or places that take 12,000 animals a year. So we started to develop that, and then it just started to grow, and we met Terra and Pranav, and just things started to happen. So at this point now, Wild Neighbors is relatively large. We have a big team. We have employees. I'm now the executive director, and so we're really moving forward, and it's very these stories are all very winding and never expected to find myself here working with data, but there you go.
There you go. Yeah. That's the one thing I find, and I love doing the origin story thing first because
Mhm.
it's always a crooked path. Even if you think it's a straightforward path, it's not. And I love that. But that's me. It was a crooked path for me too. So, Tara, what about you? How did you get to this point?
Yeah, thanks, Gail. And again, such an honor to be here with you today. So thanks so much for hosting us. My name is Terra Kelly. I am a wildlife veterinarian and an epidemiologist, and I too definitely took a long, winding path to get to where I am today in my career. So I grew up in a small town in Wyoming, and I spent a lot of time exploring the outdoors with my dad, who at the time worked for the Bureau of Land Management. So from early on, I learned through these experiences with him that both wildlife health and conservation are very complex issues that are shaped by a number of different stakeholder priorities. And these priorities are often competing with each other. So things like habitat protection, ranching and resource extraction, as well as things like recreation. And so that was really the motivation for me to go on to college to study conservation biology and natural resource management. But about halfway through my undergraduate career, I realized that what I was really passionate about was the wildlife health piece or component. So, this idea or thought about how disease and things like environmental change can affect or influence the health of free-ranging wildlife populations. So, it was really that realization that then took me to veterinary school. Um, and then on to pursue an internship and a residency in wildlife medicine, and then eventually on to pursue further graduate training where I got to study wildlife health and epidemiology.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, I'm so happy to have you here. So, Pranav, how about you?
Yeah, thank you, Gail, for the invitation and hosting us on this podcast. So, my name is Pranav Pandit. I'm also a veterinarian and epidemiologist. I'm originally from India, so that's where I had my veterinary education. And when I was in the vet school, that's when India had its first highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak.
Mm.
And I used to do a lot of bird watching back then. I still try to do, but it's kind of gotten less nowadays. But that kind of led me to kind of started working with local organizations back in India to understand whether some of the migratory birds are involved in the transmission back then. And that definitely helped me kind of spike my interest in epidemiology, disease ecology. And that's how I kind of started. I decided to kind of go more into the research path where I definitely would be thinking more about emerging infectious viruses and how disease ecology kind of play an important part in that. So eventually, I moved to Davis. That's where I started doing a lot of quantitative epidemiology work around emerging infectious viruses. And now I'm an assistant professor at UC Davis. And that's what my lab kind of focuses more on, kind of developing predictive models, mathematical models for emerging infectious diseases in wildlife as well as in livestock. So that's how I'm here.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, and I'm kind of seeing how everybody is tied together a little bit in this, but what I want to do now is really talk about the origins of Wild Alert. We know it's underneath the Wild Neighbors Database Project, but let's talk about what it is, its origin story, and the pros and cons of all those things, but the origin story. So, Tara, do you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gail. So I'll first tell you a little bit about what Wild Alert is, and then I can then tell you a little bit about how it came to be. So Wild Alert is a wildlife disease surveillance system, and it was designed to detect unusual health events in wildlife in near real time. So it aggregates clinical data from a network of wildlife rehabilitation organizations that is entered into WORMed, so the Wildlife Rehabilitation Medical Database, as you mentioned, developed by Wild Neighbors Database Project. And this is an online database that is used by rehabilitators around the world to manage their patient health records. So the system, Wild Alert, analyzes patterns across this clinical data to identify what we call anomalies or unusual patterns in the data that might indicate some issue. For example, a disease outbreak or an emerging health threat. So the system looks at patterns of clinical signs or symptoms in animals rather than confirmed diagnoses. So this approach, which is called syndromic surveillance, allows us to detect issues early. So while we're waiting for laboratory confirmations to be made, where we can have more definitive diagnoses. So by doing this, Wild Alert can serve as an early detection tool for health threats, but also an early warning system. So that's a huge benefit. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we got started. So Wild Alert started really with a simple question. So how can the valuable data that wildlife rehabilitators are out there collecting every day through their work be used to better understand the health of free-ranging wildlife populations? So I was at the University of California, Davis, and I was working as an epidemiologist at the time when Devin Dombrowski from the Wild Neighbors Database Project and scientists from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife approached me to explore this question. So together and with Rachel's help, we reached out to wildlife rehabilitation organizations to partner with them to start kind of digging in and thinking about this question more critically and to start building the system as we know now as Wild Alert. Later, Pranav joined our team, and with his expertise, we were able to build in the technical components of the system that allow us to automatically classify wildlife cases according to these clinical presentations or symptoms that they're presenting with, and detect and alert to these unusual anomalies or patterns. And so that's kind of how we all kind of came to be and developed the system as we know it now with Wild Alert.
You may not even realize, way back in the dark ages, before before the time of this group, this has been a holy grail, leveraging the data, the information, and wildlife rehab. It's been a holy grail for many of us for decades, and we did some very early perhaps maybe even foolish attempts without the technology and with the veterinary background to try and pull a system less about alerts, more just about leveraging and integrating data across systems. And of course, we spent our time doing standardized terminology because there were multiple system or multiple databases, not many, but enough to be a problem. The syndromic surveillance, which I totally understand how that works. What do you think are the pros and cons of that model, given the space?
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good question. So I think from the perspective of Wild Alert, I think the major benefit for us is that the syndromic approach allows for that early detection piece. So we can use the clinical presentations that animals are coming into centers with to be able to look at patterns that might suggest that we have an event going on. So we can respond a little bit earlier and then dig in deeper as we move forward to conduct investigations to confirm that there's actually a disease outbreak or an issue that we needed to address. I think also in this context, it really has a benefit in that wildlife health is always under-resourced, right? So there's a huge range of capacity of wildlife clinics and rehabilitation organizations. There's a lot of variation in funding. So not every animal is going to have a suite of diagnostic tests or a workup that's going to lead to a definitive diagnosis. So we can use the valuable data from those patients as well to look for potential problems that we can then allocate resources to and dig in a little bit deeper and understand what's going on. I think with those benefits comes a little bit of a trade-off, right? So when you have a syndromic system and one like Wild Alert, is that we're alerting to sort of these clusters or unusual patterns. And when you have data like this, there's a bit of noise or messiness to it. And some of those signals aren't always going to be true outbreaks, right? So it takes a team and working closely with our partners on the ground in these organizations to really reach out to them and ground truth these alerts to better understand if we're dealing with a true event or is this just a statistical pattern that we're seeing that potentially is not really something that rises to the occasion of a disease outbreak that requires resources to go in and investigate further.
Oh, I think that value of maximizing use of resources and as you say, a sector that is so terribly, terribly under-resourced is huge. Yeah, given the diversity of species and the diversity of numbers of species and the diversity of seasons and locations, et cetera, how do you set up the triggers for alerts? Yeah, how do you determine those? How do you come to those?
Yeah,
And
I
that may
think
be somebody else's question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that that is something that we've been working on and developing and improving as we go. And as I mentioned, Pranav came in and joined our team to really help us sort of develop the back end of the system that utilizes those methodologies to be able to detect those anomalies. So I'll let him go ahead and jump in with the specifics on that technical piece.
Absolutely. So I think what I would do at this stage is probably kind of just give you a walkthrough about what are the back-end models that actually run in Wild Alert, so that we can think about how we are able to identify some of these anomalies. So, for example, if one of the rehabilitation centers receives, let's say, a waterfowl, a duck species, they go through their normal routine, work upon it, and someone, a volunteer, a veterinarian, or a veterinary technician would enter the data into the wildlife rehabilitation medical database. And that data is basically just the initial clinical findings, the description about how the case was presented, so on and so forth. So that's basically just text that we receive. And fortunately, over the last 4 or 5 years, the natural language processing models have significantly kind of improved, as many of you probably already might be using some of these products. So we use a suite of those smaller models, not the large language models, but a smaller version of those, to kind of train that language, that description of cases, to identify clinical classifications. And we have a large suite of our data set that is actually labeled. What do we mean by labeled is basically Dr. Terra Kelly here actually goes through that each of those cases manually and assigns a correct clinical classification based on her expertise and the information that's been kind of entered, the data that's entered. And it kind of forms a large training data set for our models to kind of get trained on how to classify these cases into clinical classifications. Not just clinical classifications, but then we also classify each of those cases for circumstances of admissions. So it might be a case that is in because of accident hit by a car or because of a cat that has actually attacked a bird, so on and so forth. And that's how we are able to now allocate clinical classifications, which kind of forms the baseline for our syndromic surveillance. So now we have all these millions of almost more than 4 million data points that are standardized and tagged with these clinical classifications. And then now we can start looking into the statistical anomalies that are formed in the time series. So what do we mean by that? So let's look at an example. Would be if we are interested in understanding if now more and more waterfowl are being presented with neurological diseases. If someone's interested in avian influenza, they would actually look at that time series. And now we actually implement two more additional machine learning models that identify these statistical anomalies within those time series that are being presented. And there is, as you mentioned, your question was about how we are able to really address the diversity in the seasonality, or just some species being very rare, some species being found very routinely. That's why we actually are implementing two separate algorithms. One of them is pretty good at identifying quick spikes in the time series, while the other one is actually pretty good at identifying anomalies when there is a lot of seasonality. And then this hybrid approach actually then allows us to identify possible outbreaks within large, diverse species, as well as various, and then we can actually implement it all across our clinical syndromes and various species that we are tracking in Wild Alert.
Interesting. So, like when you have circumstances of admission, you have both circumstances of admission and clinical signs, I assume. Does lab diagnostics, when it is done, get incorporated in there into the system? Or is it totally just so what I'm thinking of is, okay, a eagle or some animal has a toxicity issue, they're hit by a car, they come in as unidentified trauma because that's 80% of the world we do. And then find out, well, but there's neurologic signs, and is that from the trauma? No, it's from the toxicity, and then we run toxicity. So how much of that gets incorporated into the system?
To kind of identify anomalies, it doesn't get incorporated in terms of if there is any confirmatory diagnostic that is already done. We are trying to keep the syndromic surveillance part completely independent of the confirmatory diagnosis that might happen in fewer individuals in our large data set. So, but that data is still important because that data eventually then allows us to kind of validate our model results. So, for example, if there is a bird that has gone through the whole diagnostic procedures and we have identified the etiology of what's really causing neurological diseases, then actually it helps us validate that our model predictions, if it is predicting it to be neurological disease, were correct. And if they were not correct, we actually then have a system where we tag that individual and then we reclassify them and retrain the model so that over the period, the model gets better and better.
And have you worked closely with any of the public health experts who in syndromic surveillance? I mean, one of the things we found when I looked into this, and again, I am not an expert, but when I looked into this decades ago, was they were actually dealing more with syndromes, and we were dealing more with presenting signs or symptoms. Has that been an issue? Maybe it's not an issue with the language model approach. That difference.
We are getting there. Like we are so when I think when we are thinking about syndromes, it's actually combination of various clinical signs. The Wild Alert second version that we launched last year, where we had these newer models that we implemented, now are able to tag individual animals if there are more than one clinical signs present. So, for example, if we are thinking about canine distemper, a coyote might have like a respiratory signs as well as neurological signs. And the model can now tag them to really convert that into a sort of a syndrome case. And then we can create alerts within Wild Alert where we actually can go in and select the filters based on clinical signs, select the filters on taxonomy, geography, of course, and then create a surveillance target for us to track whether we are seeing any increase or decrease in the admissions related to that particular syndrome. So we are getting there.
Well,
But
that's amazing. I mean, it's fabulous. Yeah, I can't tell you how excited I am to hear that because that's, as I said, that's been the holy grail for a long time. So how exciting. Okay. I want to move on to ask about kind of the challenges y'all faced in developing this. And I in no way want to throw anybody under the bus. I mean, wildlife rehabilitators are the hardest working people I know. And I know from working closely with them for decades that they aren't always really good at keeping their records in a timely fashion. So I know that's going to be one of the things that's probably been a challenge, but what other challenges have you um, come across either through the system itself or through the sector, working with the people that you're working with to create this program, the wildlife rehabilitators?
Yeah, so I'll take that one on, Julie. Since I've been in wildlife rehabilitation and I'm a wildlife rehabilitator, this is kind of where my role as what I'm doing right now has been. Really, like this whole Wild Alert thing and where we're going was never necessarily our initial intention. Like when we developed Wormed, we just wanted a database that people could use
Right.
that was very easy, that was very user friendly, that anybody could use, you know. And little did we realize, I think our ultimate goal was like, wow, look at what we could do. Like, how can we help the rehabbers? How can we help these animals by looking at this data? That was definitely, I mean, we started this in our early 30s. It wasn't, we weren't looking, that far, but we definitely began to realize the value of this. So
Huge.
really all it was just, it's creating a system that people are willing to use and that they can use. And it's just over time, they get better and better. It's helping people use the system. So, I mean, I'm at every conference that I can get to. I'm talking to people. We have help requests, like help system. Like we do as much outreach as we're humanly possible. Every time I go to a conference, I go and visit organizations. This is a community project, and our focus was to make something so easy and simple and user friendly that it was usable. And then eventually, like the technology has caught up that we're actually now able to do things with that information that we couldn't have done 20 years ago, much less 10 years ago.
Right.
As we're going through, we're implementing this in different areas in different states. The first state we implemented was California. There's a lot of outreach. There's a lot of communication, explaining what's going on, how to better do this, how to better enter data into the system so that it works. And in my experience, all the wildlife rehabilitators are all very interested. They want to contribute. They want to be part of this. They want to help wildlife. They want to be part of conservation. They just don't necessarily have the time or the resources themselves because they're on that hamster wheel just taking care of animals and trying to run their organization. So as long as it's very clear what we need from them, what is actually happening, what kind of data is being used, it's not Big Brother, it's, and how this is going to help wildlife in the long run, it really hasn't been, I wouldn't say it's been a challenge, it's just been persistence and a lot of communication.
Did you receive any resistance to the sharing of their data?
Not really. And I say that because what we did is we're very clear about the type of data that comes into the system. And most of it is what they would report to their states anyways. And so we're not taking any personal identifiable information.
Yeah.
We're not taking any proprietary information. There's nothing about treatments. There's nothing about prescriptions. There's nothing about what happened to that animal. It is all very initial intake information and why it came in, and then the diagnosis. And that is it. And that is information that is shared readily with agencies already. So when we looked into the data privacy information, and when we explain what's actually happening, and that we are incredibly, incredibly protective of their data, like it's not just going out there in the world. Anything that's getting exported doesn't have names or anything on it. The rehabbers are the most important part. So we want to make sure that they are being taken care of how they need to be taken care of. Otherwise, there's nothing.
That says just an immense amount about y'all's approach and your communication skill, because I do know that was a very significant concern for a lot of people. So it just says a ton about the work you've done to have superseded that barrier and not have had problems. That's great.
It's not perfect, but I think once we have that conversation with somebody, and they want to help, they want to contribute, they want to be recognized. And I think that's what this is allowing them to do, is to be recognized as the work that they're doing and contributing to the whole. And they need to be at the table in these conversations. And in the past, we haven't been. So as we continue to professionalize our profession and standardize our information and it comes together, we have incredible value as a community to contribute to the conversation of global health.
Excellent. Any surprises or challenges in the system itself beyond working with the community?
Yeah, I can think of one actually. I mean, rather than it's a wonderful surprise actually. Like, I think working with some of the State Department users, I think we quickly realized that along with the alerts that we are generating through the system, there was also a requirement for some kind of a page which will summarize the whole situation. And that kind of eventually led to what we call it now as the state dashboard. So each state would get a dashboard that's summarizing what's happening during a given time period, what's happening with respect to various clinical classifications that are being reported, number of species, the diversity of species, and the circumstances of admissions. So I think during our discussions with them, during multiple iterations of the platform, I think this need came out in front for us, and we were able to kind of deliver on it, which I think has been a good surprise and probably a good success of the platform as well.
Have you actually, I guess my first question is, I think this is your data sources are only wormed database. Is that correct? Have you been able to, or do you have any dreams or thoughts about integrating other? I mean, I know there's not a lot of wildlife rehab databases, but there are a few others. Has there been any broadening there?
I've definitely had conversations with other, wildlife rehabilitation databases, and the want and the need is real. We're working on a way literally right now to be able to incorporate a second data set, which is that whole process of incorporating a different data set has to be looked at, analyzed. How is it coming in? There also has to, what is the time of how that comes in? So if the data set is not online, then it is very difficult to get it into our system. If it's online, it's going to be a much easier system, but there is a lot of development that has to go into that. So, and right now there's not a ton of funding or resources for this sort of thing. We really, really want to do this and work together and work as a community and work as a group where, everything we do is community based. So we want to get to that point, and it's just a matter of working through those scenarios, talking to the right people, getting funding to be able to develop that process, and being able to look at the whole picture. And it's close. It's so close. We all want to do it. It's just a matter of making it happen and getting the resources to make it happen. I think there are other possible data sets. Pranav he can talk about one of the other data sets that we're working on right now, and some of the future data sets that we're looking at also.
Yes, I think along with like wildlife rehabilitation data sets, our next challenge or probably an improvement is to kind of think about how we can also integrate data sets that are generated through active surveillance. For example, right now, the state of Arizona is interested in kind of integrating their state surveillance data sets into Wild Alert. So the challenge that we are trying to work on right now is to then standardize that data set similar to the one that is being standardized in Wild Alert, and then
So Pranav,
into
just real quick for our listeners, can you distinguish between active surveillance and monitoring? Because I think that's
absolutely.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
so active surveillance is definitely one where we go out into the field and actively sample animals or collect data around them to understand the state of particular disease. And it's most of the time geared towards a specific disease or group of diseases or pathogens. So that's what we are trying to do right now. We are trying to integrate some of the data that's been generated by state of Arizona into Wild Alert, and we are trying to standardize that data set very much similar to the one that we have standardized for wormed. Along with that, I think our future aims actually also are to focus more on integrating additional metadata around environmental data sets, landscape, climate, which actually could help us improve the prediction of where the next outbreak might occur and help us also visualize the distribution of cases on a spatial map, as well as to understand what's really driving those outbreaks. Is there something specific that's happening, and understand the ecology of certain diseases better?
So, with that, being able to maybe predict where something might happen, would that be something then that could be sent back to the rehabilitators, for example, to say, well, this might be a year that you're going to see a lot more of this or a lot more of that? Is that kind of part of the thought process there?
Yes, I think that's where we are heading towards. I think we want our models to kind of identify which regions of, let's say, a particular state might see
Hmm.
more than expected number of certain types of diseases
Hmm.
or certain types of species. What part of the year we will see an increased number of cases, and can we at least get some kind of early signals so that we can prepare certain rehabilitation organizations better.
Awesome. Julie, I walked over you. You had a question, but I butted
no,
in.
no, I was tossing it to you. So
Oh, okay. Well, look at there. Beautifully done.
yeah.
I've never co-hosted before. That worked great.
Tara, we haven't heard from you in a while. What are some of the achievements that have been achieved? Achievements been achieved. Okay.
There
You know
you
where I'm
go.
going.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the most important ones is just going back to this idea of how we've been able to use the system to show just how powerful that data collected by wildlife rehabilitators can be, especially when it's coming into a system that integrates data over multiple centers. It's that collective knowledge and power that it's contributing. So with that, Wild Alert has been able to successfully detect anomalies across a wide range of species and taxa. I think Pranav mentioned this earlier, going from birds to mammals and reptiles, that when we went in and dug a little deeper and conducted investigations collaboratively with the state wildlife agencies and the rehabilitation organization partners that were involved, were found to be caused by a range of different threats. So both infectious as well as non-infectious disease threats. And just some examples, we've been able to detect anomalies associated with things like red tide-associated brevetoxicosis in marine birds, oil contamination. We've identified clusters or anomalies associated with things like West Nile virus, highly pathogenic avian influenza, as well as things like canine distemper, and then all the way to clusters of animals stranding associated with extreme weather events. So the system has been flexible enough to be able to detect these anomalies across these diverse taxa groups, but also looking at a variety of different threats. And I think that also sort of speaks to the value of that syndromic approach, is we've been able to look very broadly across threats that we know about, endemic threats, but also things that are emerging that we might not know about. For example, in California, when we first started working on this project and we were collaborating with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, we saw an uptick of admissions of dove species that were presenting to organizations within the center of the state, Central California, with neurologic disease. And so in doing the investigation through that state wildlife agency, they identified that these clusters were caused by a virus called paramyxovirus type 1. And that was a virus that had earlier emerged and had been identified through that agency investigation in Southern California. And we were able to use the system to then show that it has in fact spread northward and was emerging in Central California. I think one of the major benefits of Wild Alert that we've talked a little bit about here today is just this idea of timeliness, so early detection. An example of this is being able to detect anomalies in marine bird admissions that were associated with red tide events. In areas where they're doing routine testing of the water and our admissions were showing anomalies within the system before those water samples were testing positive for harmful algal bloom. And so we're working with these agencies to also look at the data to better understand which wildlife species might be good indicators of these events, and how can we use this data to look at that more critically and be able to use that information in a more sort of early detection, but also a more of a predictive sort of sense to better understand the system. And then finally, just one thing that happened more recently, in thinking through successes and things that were a little bit less expected, we had the opportunity to work with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to use Wild Alert in emergency response efforts. So during last year's Southern California wildfires in January of 2025, we used Wild Alert to facilitate real-time monitoring of affected wildlife during those fires. And so we were able to use the system to help that agency response effort and look at the data within Wild Alert to help track patient intakes as well as outcomes, while reducing the reporting burden on these busy organizations that are on the ground, taking in those affected animals and spending time caring for them and not having the time that they would like to be able to communicate with partners in the state that are all coordinating on that response effort. So that's just kind of a little bit of an example of the different things that we've been able to do with Wild Alert, kind of spanning from this idea of early detection and looking at threats all the way to using it to have a better eye on monitoring events and using it in response efforts that are going on with our state agency partners.
Wow, that's it's amazing. I'm gonna um maybe bring it back out just a little bit and just say, okay, I mean, just listening to you for the last, little bit, I'm like, I can see the importance of this in so many different ways, but this is the how, why, and who type question is how, why, who is this important to? Like right now, who is it important to?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, it is a beneficial tool for a range of different stakeholders that we're working with. So right now, we're partnering with a number of different state agencies that are benefiting from that information, as well as a number of different rehabilitation organization, and then also kind of extending to the investigators, us who are working on it, as well as, researchers and people who are benefiting from knowing a little bit more about what's going on in these wildlife populations. So for rehabbers, I think Wild Alert is important from the perspective of it provides them with an even greater opportunity to get more insights into what's happening to these free-ranging wildlife populations and allowing them to use their data more broadly to better inform on conservation decisions and management actions through providing more information on population health. I think for groups like agencies, researchers, conservation partners, I think it is really valuable and important from the perspective of providing population level data that can assist with health monitoring, early detection, response
Mhm.
effort.
Awesome. So Rachel, I'm a wildlife rehabilitator. I take in 20 bats a year. I'm an independent. Why is this important to me? I'm small potatoes. I'm just trying to do my stuff and then I have a full-time job. So why? Why is this important?
It's an excellent question, Gail. I love this question.
I
Um,
knew you would.
I do. Um, I think every single wildlife rehabilitator, no matter how big or how small, is just as important. All the information is important. We've got 50 of you across a state that take in 20 bats. But what you have there is you have the diversity and you have the location spread out. And when you can look at all that data in one place, you have power. My whole thing has been like rehabbers have we've been on that hamster wheel, as I mentioned. We've been fighting to be recognized. We want to help. We want to be part of conservation. We want to be part of that conversation so badly. And now that I mean, again, I didn't expect this when I started, but now we have, you know, over 4 million standardized records across the world. Like we can now be taken seriously because we are professionals. We have standardized data. We can show trends. We can make a difference. We can make an impact all together as a community on why these animals are coming in. I know, we talk about the syndromic and the wild alert and like the alerts, and all of that is super important. But for me, the importance is looking at this data collectively on why animals are coming in. Lead toxicity, cat caught. What sort of things can we do if we can finally prove that the number one reason animals comes in is mostly because of cats? Um,
Mhm.
and how exactly is lead affecting everything? And not only that, but you've got like hit by cars, and can we put crossings in certain areas because we can see that these number of animals are coming in because we need wildlife crossings in these areas. So for rehabbers, our goal is not to have any animals coming into us. Like our outreach and we would love it if less animals came into us and that the ones that came in were the ones that really, really did need our help.
Mhm.
So every little bit to me counts and is so important. And it brings us together as a community, and it gives us a voice of, we are wildlife professionals too. We have input in this. We are working our little butts off, as Julia said. We've been working so hard, and what can we do with this? And I think we're finally starting to get recognized as a really important partner and stakeholder in this larger conversation, and we can have an impact on legislation. I mean, what can we do with this? We're just, we're just scratching the surface of what we can do. I think we have such an opportunity now. And my ultimate hope is that at some point, we can be compensated for our hard work. Like, this information is valuable, and how can wildlife rehabilitators be compensated for our work? And how are we, how do we use Wild Alert for wildlife rehabilitators as well? How can we signal, preemptive events where, like, these match up with certain things, watch out, the brown pelicans are going to start coming in soon, or, and being able to have that consistent communication across across states, across state lines. If we could actually have, if it could be a national system and incorporate in all the other data sets, would be amazing too. So there's so much underlying importance to our community as a whole to be able to be represented as a professional community.
I want to thank Dr. Julia Ponder for being my co-host for this topic, this go-round. It was very exciting to have a co-host for me, but I really appreciate her time and her expertise. I also want to thank Rachel Avilla. She's the Executive Director for the Wild Neighbors Database Project, and the people who work with her who are on for the Wild Alert podcast today is Dr. Terra Kelly and Dr. Pranav Pandit. And I thank them all for taking a lot of time to talk to us about this project and how important it is. We all know that we try to be professional all the time. We know what we do is important, and we need to get the word out there. And this is one of the ways that we can contribute to conservation. Thanks to everybody. Wildlife Rehabilitation from Rescue to Release is a production of Partners for Wildlife, working hand in hand with wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians to support them to improve the welfare of orphaned, ill, and injured wildlife. Our executive producer is me, Gail Buell. I'm the Partnership Coordinator for Partners for Wildlife with the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine. Our producer is Reese Rosado.